My name is Amy Glass. I am one of the reference librarians at ICC. I am also the coordinator of our One Book, One College program. And this is a different experience for all of us. We are not used to doing this as a virtual thing. So this is an uncharted territory for us. But I wanted to welcome everybody who registered and is attending right now. I am hoping that everybody has read the book. Of course, it looks backward on the screen here, but there is the book. Please try to get a copy if you can and read the book, because I think it is really a wonderful book. And there are classes that are incorporating the book in their coursework, and I appreciate the faculty that are doing so with this. Today's presentation is on from Stan Mendenhall, who is a professor at Illinois Central College in history, and his presentation today is titled Perseverance and Courage in the Face of Racism. So I am at this point going to turn over to Mr. Mendenhall here and let him take over at this point. And he's going to be starting off with a few words, and then he is encouraging more of a discussion at this point too. So I will mute my microphone and turn it over to Mr. Mendenhall, please. Oh, before I forget, one more thing. If you do want to add a comment or a question, you can do it through chat, but I would say probably turn on your microphone. The easiest way to turn on your microphone is just to hit your space bar real fast, and that will momentarily unmute you. So, Mr. Mendenhall.
Okay, thank you, Amy. I'd like to thank the library and Amy for this opportunity today. I'm looking forward to it, and I'm going to, I have a few comments about the book and my impressions of it, and then, as Amy said, I'd like to open this up for a general discussion if we could. First, for those of you, I'm assuming that quite a few have read the book, but for those of you who have not read it, it's a story by Trevor Noah about his life growing up in mostly post-apartheid South Africa. And he jumps around somewhat in his age range in the book, but near the end of it, he's in probably his early 20s, maybe mid 20s when he finishes this part of the book. The interesting thing to me, in fact, there are many interesting parts to it, but one part is that he does punctuate the book with official examples of apartheid and discrimination. In fact, he opens the book with the Immorality Act of 1927, which had a direct impact on his life. So there are elements of that are official parts of apartheid, racial discrimination, and then the largest part of the book, though, is his personal account of his life growing up in a system that was based on discrimination. Now, a couple more things about him. This is a very personal account. He had a white father, a Swiss-German father, and a black mother. And that made him an unusual person in South Africa because there were basically three different groups. There was white, black, and colored. And his group didn't exactly, at least especially him personally, he felt he didn't fit in anywhere. But when you read the book, I felt that he also fit in everywhere because of his own personal ability, his own street smarts. He was able to make himself adaptable to almost any situation he found himself in. And that's another important part of the book is he was clearly, his street smarts were extensive. And one of the things that made it possible for him to be so adaptable was his ability in languages. He could speak numerous languages, and that way he could, in any situation he found himself in, he'd kind of assess it and then think, okay, how can I work this group, or how can I work this situation to fit in? So he is right. On the one hand, he didn't fit in most cases, but he was so crafty and so skilled in many ways that he could make himself fit and adapt to almost any situation. The other thing about the book is obviously a very personal account about his life, but clearly the most important part of this book to him was his mother. She is present throughout the book. And it's interesting, isn't it, that he, as a young man, he just, as many young people can, they resist, they rebel against their parent. But clearly by the end of the book, this is almost a dedication to his mother more than anything else. One other note about my title for the book. I titled it Perseverance and Courage, but really I think a word that would fit as well as perseverance would be resilience. Because the other thing that stood out to me throughout the entire book was that not only him, but his mother and most of the other people he came into contact with, they were faced with an untenable situation, a system that was designed to work against them, and yet they were extremely resilient in designing some kind of meaningful life purpose in this type of system. And if you've read the book, or if you are going to read the book, keep that in mind, because you find them in a discriminatory system, and yet they find a way to somehow persevere. And they are so resilient, especially him, in how he manages life. Another thing that stood out to me was, and I was amazed at how honest he was in the book. He didn't hold back on his misbehavior at all. His, I guess, illegal and questionable behavior. He pirated CDs, technology. He had kind of a cottage industry going in technology. He became a DJ. And again, I think that's one of the things that points out his resilience. Now, another thing, I'm gonna bring this up because I think it fits us. Last summer I attended a conference at a college in Michigan, and this conference was on poverty, worldwide poverty. And one of the themes that stood out in this conference was the idea that poverty, one of the major components of poverty, is lack of access. And that stuck with me the entire year when I taught especially my world history classes, because you find in almost every culture throughout history, groups that are denied access. They create every society, every culture seems to have created an underclass, purposely created an underclass. And it's an area that I haven't done enough research into, but I want to look at it from a historical point of view, because the dominant class, I'm sounding Marxist here, but the dominant class, the dominant group, purposely creates a group as an underclass that becomes something of almost a servant class to them, or one that they can take advantage of. And I've been thinking about this periodically, that is there any, and again, join in if you have any comments about this or thoughts. I cannot think of any culture throughout all of history or civilization that has not had some kind of underclass, either purposely or indirectly. An underclass or a subculture has been created. And when you think about Trevor Noah's life, the way he describes it in South Africa, once that underclass is created and they are denied access to the normal routes to success in society, what happens is they create their own society, their own culture, their own way of life that is completely separate from the mainstream society. And so that creates that rift, that division, even makes it even deeper between these different classes, these different groups. And I've not found any book in my own work that deals with that only. Now, some of you may know some sociology books that deal with this kind of thing. But I found that theme, that idea kept standing out every time, every episode, every adventure that he got into, or misdeed that he got into. You could find that element of being a part of that underclass and all the official avenues working against him. And yet still he, his mother, everybody that he came into contact with was resilient enough to try to work around it or work through it to create some kind of meaningful existence, okay? A couple other things that caught my attention in the book is that it's near the end of the book, and it's on page, actually it's on page 221. You can see him growing up. You can see him changing and maturing, because at one point someone stole a camera, and somehow I forget exactly how, but he got a hold of the camera and he saw pictures on it. And he actually began to feel remorse, whereas all his adventures before that and misdeeds before that, he simply, that was just part of life. That was just the way of getting by and existing. But now he realized he had taken something from somebody's life. And you could see a change in him at this point, that he began to be more reflective and realized that that some of the things he had done in his past may have been inappropriate, some of them obviously so. But I think that was one of the things that I saw in one of the themes I saw in the book is, well, let me ask you, and anybody can join in on this. Why do you think he wrote this book? What was his main purpose in writing this book? Anybody have any ideas?
This is Amy. I would say partially to just give people an idea of what it was like to grow up in that repressive regime, but at the same time not being part of any part of it. I think that was part of the reason why he told the story. I think he did it fairly well with a lot of his little, the stories may not seem connected in a lot of ways when you read it, but if you put it all together as a big whole picture, you get an idea of what it was like to live in South Africa when apartheid was there, and and things like that. So I think that's the main focus that I would say on that, but I'm willing to hear other people's things on that.
Yeah, any other thoughts on his purpose behind the book?
I think it's a tribute to his mom.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, Amy, I think you're correct that he wanted to show what it was like to grow up in that kind of regime. And Dave, I think you're absolutely right also that this is a dedication to his mother. And again, I mentioned this earlier, but isn't it fascinating that in many respects he sounds like a typical young man, a teenager, preteen, that, oh, mom, you're all wet, you're wrong. But then later he clearly came to appreciate everything about her. Also, I think, do you feel like this is something of a confession on his part? That he realizes that his life as a teen and a young man was going in the wrong direction. He now feels like some of the things he had done were wrong, and he's somewhat confessing that in the book. I see those as the three main areas. Anybody else? Any other comments about his purpose behind the book?
Good morning.
That last part that you said about the maybe confessional nature, I think there's a lot of truth in that. And it sounds like you may be thinking especially of the chapter towards the end where he talks about how for a while, for a couple of years or so, he settled into this unproductive situation in the hood.
Yeah.
He and his friends were really very active and busy all day, every day, making these amazing deals, like these connecting together these long chains of transactions, which it seems like really did serve some, you know, some collective good for that community in some sense. But the bottom line was they were really just on a treadmill and running to stand still. And that after, you know, even after all of this ingenuity and energy that they poured into all of this for more than a year, what did they have to show for it at the end of it? Pretty much nothing. And it seemed to me like he was making a larger point there, that in some comparable way, that's probably kind of what life is like for a whole lot of people, pretty much all around the world, but especially in communities of color where you just, it seems to be incredibly hard to get out of this familiar situation that you're
Yeah,
in.
you're absolutely right. And that's why I keep seeing this kind of culture or this kind of situation that people find themselves in, that the resilience is that you continue to, you can make a living, you can make a life, but he finally realized that it was a dead end. That this would, if he was, let's say 20 doing these kinds of activities, he could be 50 and still be doing exactly the same thing. And it also speaks to his intelligence, don't you think, and that he realized this is a dead end. I need to find a way out of it. And ultimately, obviously he did so. And Dave, you mentioned earlier that this accounting for his mother, she in the end becomes, I think, the greatest influence in his life, without a doubt. I found it interesting, though, that I got the impression that he ultimately did pretty much reject her strident religion, but it probably did set a certain degree of a moral footing for him. Okay.
Stan, I think there was a Mary Peterson who wanted to say something, and then I also had a chat from a student who said something about wanting his take on fighting racism in general. So
Okay. Mary, did you have a comment?
No, I was just going to say, I think it was maybe not as much as a confession as much as it was something for him to process what he had gone through.
Good
And
point.
this was his way of processing it by putting it in writing and to be a benefit to someone else down the road.
Yeah, it's a good point. In another respect, although it would not be the kind of life I'd want to live, he had a really fascinating youth, didn't he? And it's a story worth telling about the different episodes that he went through. And some of them were comical, especially his romances, but then also the tragedy of his youth. And at one point, when his mother married Abel and they went broke and he had to sleep, his only place he could sleep was in the back seat of a car. It is a tragic but really story worth telling, and for us to understand how difficult it is for someone in that kind of situation. Okay, Kylie, did you have a question or a comment you wanted to make?
I've never actually read the book, but from what you guys were saying, I just got that he was trying to fight racism.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It's clear that one of his other themes is that not only, and it's interesting that most of this takes place in the post-apartheid period in South Africa, but even at that, the discrimination and the racism is just is evident. It's another prominent theme of the book, which is worth, for its purpose alone, is worth reading. Okay.
I had a couple other notes that I was making with a couple of the things that you were talking about. I think as far as the confessional aspect, I think one of the things that jumped out at me, and it was one of the more memorable things in the book, was his friend and he attempting to steal the candy. and what happened after that point. I'm not sure if I want to get too much into it because I don't know how many students have done anything with that. If they haven't read the book, I don't want to spoil it too much. But let's just say that the outcome for him was good as compared to the outcome for his friend. And so in a sense, that's kind of a confessional aspect of it too. The other thing I was thinking of, and it may be kind of a stretch a little bit, but when you were talking about resilience, I can even point that in the direction of his dog, Fifi.
Yeah. Yeah.
Again, you know, I can tell this story out because I thought it was a cute story, and you don't really think about it in resilience, but his family had two dogs growing up, and they thought one was just stupider than anything and the other one was a real smart. Then they figured out that the one that they thought was stupid, Fifi, was actually deaf, if I remember correctly. And so when they called Fifi, didn't come, but when they called the other dog, it came, you know, that dog came and Fifi came right along. It's because it was relying on the other dog, and it figured out a way to basically live their own resilience, you know, so the dog even figured that out. So
Yeah. In his, I think that shows some of his humanity too, because you could see that he had that emotional aspect, that emotional connection to the animals as well. The one other thought I had is that his, you know, again, throughout the book, he mentions his misbehaviors. But near the end of the book, when he is arrested and is in jail and fearful of going to prison, I took that as a wake-up call for him as well. Did anybody see it that way also, that he realized he was on the edge of some serious trouble, and you could see a little bit of a change in his behavior, his attitude after that, because he'd always been able to skirt that and be able to get away with it or talk his way out of it, but now without help, he was going to be he could potentially some serious trouble, and that may have changed his whole perspective some. They might see it from that perspective too, that was something of a growing up lesson for him, a pretty serious one too. Anybody see that aspect?
Sir, I kind of see where you're coming from there, and it seems to me that he's almost showing the world that no matter where you start out, you can progress and move on from your past.
Yeah. Do you think also in that part, again, this is a part of the book that's well worth reading, because he also talks about the judicial system and how corrupt it is. And in fact, basically it's based on bribery as much as anything. So it's a good indication of a system that's broken, a judicial system is broken, a political, social, judicial system is broken. And maybe that might have been one of the reasons he also included that in the book, so that people could see how corrupt the system really is. Also, again, as Amy said, I don't want to give away too much of the book if you haven't read it yet. He thought he had kind of gotten away with it, that he had manipulated the system again. And in the end, then he found out who had actually put up the money for him to get out of trouble. And he was once again surprised by it. But then again, that plays into one of the other major reasons why he wrote the book, is there was always someone there behind him, tough love, hard on him, but was always there for him. And again, that might have been another major reason why he wrote the book. Let's talk about his mother a little bit. Why do you think, what drove her? What made her constantly, regularly challenge the system? When others would just give in and take a menial job, she was constantly trying to find a better job. She would find jobs that were typically out of bounds for someone in her position, her racial status, and yet she constantly tried to. She simply rejected that, ignored it. What do you think drove her? What was it that made her have that kind of determination? Any ideas?
Hi, this is Margo. I think she's representative of a group of women that strive to do more, and it's hard to sometimes do more. And I don't think, I'll put it this way, I don't think she's alone in what she feels. It's that she had the drive, the determination to actually do it. And I think it's also probably partially the time period that she's in as well, is that it was starting to open up a little bit for her to be able to kind of find that space to do something more than, let's say, her mother was able to do or her grandmother was able to do. So I think the timing is right, and that she's expressing something that a lot of Black women, or in some cases women in general, at that time period was able to do. And so she also uses that to spur or to affect how she's teaching her own son. So I mean, it's her, but it's also what she wants for her own child, for Trevor.
Yeah, Margo, that's a good point, because if you think about it, her determination, then she gave that to her son. She was not going to let him, sit back and fall out completely. And I think, don't you think ultimately he realized that he ultimately realized that she gave him that determination to succeed himself.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Also, if you think about it, didn't he, early in the book, didn't he say it was a woman? What was the term he used? It was a world run by women. And it's amazing, isn't it, when you think about it's a world run by women, but then look at the male-dominated society. What a contradiction the book brought out, because you have women who are the foundation, the stability of a home, and you have someone like his stepfather, Abel, who is, I guess one way to describe him as a failure. But what does that say about men in this kind of situation? And Dave, you brought it up earlier, why would men give up like Abel did? What was it that in fact, I think late in the book, Abel says that he basically admits he's a failure. Why? What is it that he finally realizes, or what does Trevor Noah bring out in the book about men in this kind of culture, this kind of situation? What I see is, you see women, they're the bedrock of the home, and men are still, even in this kind of restrictive culture society, men are expected to go out and make it, and yet they can't. They're denied any kind of access, any kind of ability to make it in the mainstream society. So does Abel represent a pretty good example of someone who may have tried to, he was an excellent mechanic. He could have had a good business, but he simply could not overcome what the restrictions, the limitations society had put on him.
I think that's a good assumption as well. When you have disparity, and I think you mentioned this earlier, when you have disparity, when you have racism, prejudice, all of that affects a whole community, and then within that you have a patriarchal system as well. I mean, it's about power. So as a male, if I can't get power outside of my home, then I'm going to try to have it inside the home. But if I'm astute enough to see that I really don't even have that power, then how else does that come out? That can come out in misbehavior, violence, all kinds of things towards women. So I think it's a problem that is larger than just, you know, what happened with Trevor Noah, but it's an issue or a problem that you see in that society, but in other societies as well, when the larger society is not giving any not any preference, but any kind of acceptance or allowance for a whole group of people. And so then you get
Yeah.
problems within that male-female dynamic as well.
Yeah, I still go back to the idea of access, because I think if you have, if it's a male-dominated society, and a man has normal access, that everyone, you know, there's even equal access for everyone, then some of those stresses would be eliminated. But you have, in Abel's case, using him as a general example, you have the woman who's the foundation of this bedrock of the home, and yet he can't make it out in society. He feels compromised. And in Abel's example, the only way he could deal with that was through violence. Any other comments or thoughts about that? And by the way, yeah, that's a good point, Margo. You do find that in many societies, not just in this one.
What are you doing now?
Any other comments?
Yeah, go watch.
Iman, do you have a question or
Yeah.
comment?
Why don't you leave? Huh?
Iman, do
Evidently,
you have
but-
a question?
It's okay if you want to play with the drink. Hey, I'm not in a meeting. You can make noise. It's okay. That's the game.
Iman, do you have a question for us? Oh, she put herself on mute. Okay, so.
Okay, one thought I have that when I finish the book is what was missing from the book. Anybody, those of you who've read it, were there questions that were unanswered for you? There were two big ones for me that I need to follow up on.
Clearly, it was a deliberate choice on the author's part, but I was kind of wishing that there was another substantial chapter near the end to tell more about how he made his big breakthrough into celebrity status. You know, starting with working the local, comedy scene in South Africa. But clearly he didn't want to include that because I think he wanted to keep the focus on his mother and his early life. But it left me just curious to know more. So has he written any other books? I haven't even bothered to look yet, but I kind of hope that he might write a sequel.
I think the only thing else he's done is that there is a young adult version of this, more for kids. So he adapted this book for younger children. I think I've heard somewhere that he is thinking of writing a sequel because he got such good acclaim for this book. This book was picked as a lot of the best book of the year, and a lot of the year he got reviews. So I think that kind of emboldened him to want to write another one, but I don't think anything has come of it at this point.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you, Amy. And he could write so many interesting things about coming to the United States as well. I would love to see that.
Yeah, absolutely. We need volume 2, don't we? Because that was the one thing that stood out, is how does this kid who was on the streets of South Africa come to host an American comedy show? And that would be a fascinating read. Mary, did you have a comment or question?
Well, if you go to some of his comedy routines, he talks about a lot of that. So you sort of need to follow him in his stand-up comedy routines.
Yeah, in fact, he kind of, near the end of the book, he hinted at that he was just starting to take off. He had traveled, he was in, I think, England and other parts of Europe and that area, and was called back home then for the emergency at the end of the book. So yeah, there's some gaps there that I'd like to see filled in about his career. And Dave, as you said, it'd be really fascinating to find out what his take on America is. when he, given his background. The other thing that stands out for me is what happened to his mother. Did she come to America with him? And her recuperation, what's her status now? Is she remarried? I'd like to see some follow-up on that as well, because, again, clearly this is much of this book is dedicated to her, and it'd be interesting to see where she stands now. I could see him offering to buy her a home in America, and I could see her turning him down. She would be too independent, and would say thank you, but I'm happy here. So that might be a possibility too. So those are the two things that really stood out to me that were missing. And again, maybe we'll get a volume 2 soon. Another thing I wanted to ask is, with those of you who've read the book, what did you find? There was some humor in the book. What did you find that was humorous, lighthearted at times? And again, this gets into some of the more the more honest parts of the book that some people are not willing to share in their own stories. I thought his romances were pretty funny. His inability, his innocence in romance was pretty good. How naive he was too, and reluctant to engage in any kind of romantic or any kind of relationship with a girl. What would be the most tragic part of the book? Any thoughts on that? There were many, I think, but was there one tragic? I think there's clearly in the book and a very tragic part, and that would be what happened to his mother. Again, I don't want to give away too much, but that would be obviously the most tragic part. But overall, what would be the tragedy of this book? The most negative aspect of the book? Any thoughts?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes. Landon,
All right.
go ahead.
So, my guess for the most tragic part in the story is probably going to be a death in the family, but I don't know. I really haven't read it before.
Yeah. When I think about the tragedy in the book, a tragic aspect of the book, it is the problems that the family faced in general. Again, leaving alone what happens near the end of the book. But also in large, it's the tragedy of apartheid and discrimination. This is, again, it is the big picture about the book and how the toll that discrimination, apartheid took on a whole people. It's a good lesson for us, I think, in America, to think about our race and social relations and how you can eliminate this, or what you can do about it. One other thought, this is going back somewhat to the early part of the book. Do you recall how his family treated him? Why was he treated differently than other members of the family? Anybody recall? And this gets into the race element in the book. Anybody recall how his family, why he was treated differently than other members of the family? He was spoiled, he was treated special, and that was because he was half white. And that set him apart. And again, it gets into the whole race discrimination element in the book, and that bigger theme, which just is a constant theme throughout the book.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is Amy again, that the color of his skin was really the main issue, and it managed to get him either by, or it either got him acceptance by some people, or it got him derision by others because of how different he looked from everybody else down in there. The other thing I was going to say is that I think one of the kind of tragedies in the book is the fact that we only get one chapter with him and his father. And I really would like to, would have liked to have known a little bit more. And if that relationship is still going on, I haven't seen any clips or anything like that to know if that's still going on, if his father's still living or anything like that. But I also kind of think that kind of ties back to maybe even Margo's point that a little bit that, since he wasn't around, mom was like, well, I got to teach this boy how to do, I got to be the mom and the dad. So, that kind of thing too. So.
Yeah, that's a good point, because his father, it didn't seem like it was so much the social situation as it was just his father was a very remote, quiet person. And in fact, I think if I remember correctly, in the early parts of the book, when he was with his father, they really didn't, even when he was with them, they didn't really communicate that much. His father was just simply a quiet, distant person in general. I don't think, and I did not get the impression his father rejected him, though. Did you? Not directly, blatantly reject him. It was more of a, again, his father was simply a distant, remote person, and he and his mother found that their relationship would not work, which is again indicates the independence and the resilience of his mother. She managed to succeed in spite of everything against her. A pretty amazing woman, person in her ability to do this. Not only did she face this kind of male-dominated society, she had all the social elements against her, and yet she managed to come out on top in almost every situation. In fact, near the end of the book, when they're talking about her recuperation, and she said that now he's the best looking person in the family. Even after her tragedy, she could still find a sense of humor. Pretty amazing person. And that, again, that is, we've said several times, that is clearly a major purpose for writing the book. Any other questions, comments about the book in general? Any thoughts that you have that you want to share? Anybody in the group?
I've assigned my students this semester to read this book as part of History 112, which, as Stan knows very well, of course, is Modern World Civilizations. And I read the book partly with that course topic in mind, and thought at a number of points during the book about how one might interpret it in terms of that the vocabulary of civilizations, think about how the author was kind of navigating the boundary between civilizations in some sense, except what does that term even mean? What I conclude from, I'm anxious to see what my students will write about this later in the semester. But my feeling is that, as we've talked about this in the past a few times privately, but I think this whole concept of civilizations, although it's still baked into several of our course titles, really is increasingly outmoded and questionable, because which civilization exists in South Africa? But clearly, as Trevor Noah shows us, it's a very rich and complex culture, weaving together different elements from all around the world. There are people from South Asia there who figure prominently in several of his anecdotes. And then there are all these different, African languages and cultures that are very distinct and exclusive from each other, as we can see. And then there's the whites, but there's not just one whites either. There's the Boers, the Afrikaners, who seem to be the main problem. As we see, there are lots of other white foreigners, especially in Johannesburg, there who really have nothing much to do with the apartheid attitude. I don't know. So anyway, everything just the languages especially I was impressed with how in his facility for language and early recognition of the value, the power of mastering different, or at least becoming fluent in different languages. How could we count how many times during the book that was the key that opened doors for him or got him out of a jam? So the relationship between language and one's identity, as well as race, but sometimes language could even trump race. That really stood out for me. I'll stop talking. I'm just thinking, such a fascinating book. I'm so glad that our committee chose this, because I think it's a wonderful thing for my students.
Yeah. So,
Margo, do you have a question or comment?
Oh, I was just gonna comment because Dave got me thinking too, because it's a supplement. In my course, because I'm teaching in international studies on sub-Saharan Africa, and I see a few students from my class here today, so I'm just saying hello. But we're probably looking at it more from a literary standpoint, and when we're looking at South Africa, I mean, we've only hit on it a little bit, but we're looking at the development of that part of Africa kind of over time. And I think the thing with this book is that's interesting is that merging of that group of what's called colored. And for, here in America, that term is definitely out of favor, and we don't use that term, but there, that term colored, it has a kind of a different meaning. So there's a lot there in the book that I think that touches on our course, but I just wanted to drop one other thing in this discussion, just because I have to. My son studied in South Africa at the University of South Africa. This is maybe 2 years ago now, and he mentioned that issue of language, and I think we don't quite see it the same way here in America. We're very much focused on everybody learn English, and that's kind of our focus. But he said there were so many languages, and nobody really had an issue of, well, you don't speak my language, because they were able to kind of go back and forth with that between languages and communicate with each other. And I remember the thing he said also was that here, obviously we have different, ethnicities and races and all that, but there, other Africans would see each other and they could tell the difference between, oh, you must be, Xhosa, or you must be this, or you must be that. And that specificity between people was so much a bigger deal there. And I think that's in the book, to an extent, but just the amount of difference in people was kind of fascinating from what I remember my son mentioning, and what's in the book as well. But I think it's just kind of a different aspect that here in America, we kind of all glom together and say we speak English, we're American first, and that's kind of it. So
Yeah, that's a great point, Margo, because the book does bring out what a multi-layered culture mix it is. And his book, he individually, I think he recognized that. And that's why those languages served him so well. And it also indicates that what a complex society it is. That even all those different language groups have their different attitudes about each other. And if you're this, you're good. If you're that, you're bad. And in that whole ranking of social groups in that society, And I didn't appreciate that enough when I read it, how multi-layered it is. Whereas you're right, we just see English, language is such an important identifier that we just kind of look at it as we're all English, or we all speak English. But it does identify much about you. In his location, South Africa, it's an identifier of your cultural place. Good, really great observation.
Stan, we've
Yeah,
only got a couple minutes left here, so I got a few things that I want to add to the discussion here.
sure.
Number one, in the chat early on, I posted a link to a Born a Crime reading list that I've created. It's on the ICC library homepage if you look for something that says Born a Crime reading list. And I'm bringing that up for two things. Number one, in that it's not just a reading list in the fact that there are also videos involved on racism and South Africa, but there's also a series of videos from Trevor Noah's what he calls his between the scenes thing. When he was doing live shows, when they would do camera setups, he would allow audience members to ask questions. And I pulled a bunch of those specifically on his growing up in South Africa and things like that. If you do a little digging, you'd probably find more on his feelings on America in general. I kind of steered away from those. I wanted to go for once more on the book. Also, you mentioning the languages. There is one article about South African language tied to the movie Black Panther, because the language in the movie Black Panther that they use, I think was, I can't remember which one it was. I want to say it was Ubuntu. And he worked with the cast on that, I believe, to get that so that they could get the language right. And he actually, if you have seen the movie, you'll remember the younger sister who worked with the computer. The computer's voice is Trevor Noah's. So, so that's kind of a, a cool little tie-in. So that article kind of goes into a little bit of what was going on with the languages created for that movie and how they can tie into, South Africa and things like that. So that reading list has a bunch of, there's ebooks, there's articles, there's videos. If anybody has any suggestions for books or articles, pages that they think I could add to that, just send them to me, things like that. So that's, unless there's any last minute comments, that's pretty much our time here. We're at 10:56. So does anybody have any last minute comments or anything of that nature that they'd like to say? Or if you want to chat, that'd be fine too.
I just wanted to thank Stan for his presentation. And if you're in my class, I just made a little link under my supplemental links for all the things that Amy was just talking about. So you'll see it there. And we'll talk about it later for my class, but I'm just saying that that link is there. Thank you, Amy.
And I am I've put in the link a few times, a feedback form. We'd like everybody who attended to fill out this form, because we'd like to have feedback so we know what we did right, what we did wrong, things like that. And for those students who are getting extra credit, I will be able to, I didn't put it on this form, but I will be able to tie you to a particular class, I hope. And I will let your faculty members know later today about that so that they will be able to give you those extra credit points. So,
Amy, thanks again for including the history department. It was a lot of fun to do this.
and thank you to Stan. Thank you very much, Stan, for agreeing to do this. We really appreciate it. There will be a couple of other events hopefully scheduled here in the next few weeks. I know I am planning on just a faculty and staff only book discussion on the book. We're looking to try to schedule a student only book discussion, so no faculty allowed and things like that for that one. And then we are looking at trying to do a Jeopardy game on the book and on South Africa at some point. We're still working on the details. We're trying to write up questions and things like that, but we're working on trying to do that. Probably most of these are going to end up in probably either late October or early November for these events. So keep an eye out. I will send things out to faculty members and staff. Keep an eye on, I'll send things to students as I know them. I'll ask faculty to please go on, send those on to faculty or to the students as well. So I appreciate everybody coming today, and if you get a chance, please out that form. I would appreciate it. And thank you very much. And at this point, everybody have a great afternoon and evening. So thank you all. Thank you again.
I just have a quick question.
Sure, go ahead, Benjamin.
There's a question.
Go ahead.
Sorry, there's a question on the form that's blank.
Oh, that's blank? Okay. Let me check on that and see here what's going on with that. First name, last name, email, how satisfied? Oh, yeah. Oh, I don't know what I meant to do there on that. So let me remove that.
Oh, so do I just like?
Okay, so refresh your screen and you should not have that form now again for that question at this point. You should only be 9 questions. If not, just leave it blank, that's fine.
Okay, it's gone. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, you're welcome.
Have
And
a good day, ma'am.
Thank you.